Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Riley Hall Show live. I'm very, very happy to be speaking to you all today. It's the show where the political stories change almost as quickly as my hairstyle does. So today we're talking about all kinds of different stories, but before we get into that, I just want to talk about the show partner that we've got for today. In response to the horrifying and escalating situation in Ukraine, a group of young activists came together to try and help those in need and make a difference. Their idea was to collaborate with artists from around the globe to create striking, evocative, and eye-catching artworks related to the crisis that could be sold on high-visibility products like tote bags and t-shirts, with all of the profits going straight to good causes on the front line. In less than 7 days, the idea became an online project called Create for Ukraine. Through their website, createforukraine.org, this small team of young people are working constantly to create a space for artists to manifest their feelings on the crisis in their work and then spread those pieces of art far and wide on a range of different products. All profits from Create for Ukraine will be donated to the Ukrainian Red Cross and the Ukrainian Central Bank's humanitarian fund, with buyers being given a choice where their money goes at the checkout so they can show their support directly to the causes that mean the most to them, which, if you ask me, is an absolutely fantastic idea. So please go to createforukraine.org and support them in any way that you can. It really is a fantastic cause. And as we all know, this crisis has been going on for far too long and never should have happened in the first place. So anything you can give is greatly appreciated. So that being said, let's get into some of the stories that we're talking about today. Less focus on Ukraine itself today. We have got some very important stories and some slightly odd stories as well. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is Laura Kuenssberg. For those of you who don't know, Laura Kuenssberg is a very prolific journalist in the UK. And she's been the chief political editor for the BBC for a long time now. And it's been announced that since Andrew Marr has stepped down from Marr, his TV show, that Laura Kuenssberg is now going to be taking over the flagship BBC political show on Sunday. Now, Kuenssberg has been in discussions about a move to the Today programme, that's in it. It's expected that she'll receive a pay rise from her existing £260,000 salary, which is pretty tasty, obviously. Marr, who was in the role beforehand, received £335,000 in his role, and a new salary will be published alongside the BBC's annual report in the summer. If you're wondering why I'm constantly looking down here, I've got my notes here. I don't, memorize everything beforehand, so the illusion is shattered now. But yeah, so this story I think is really interesting because the boom in podcasts and commercial speech radio means that BBC presenters are increasingly tempted by competitive salaries and a reduction in scrutiny, let's be honest, that can come from switching to private sector companies. The BBC is obviously publicly owned. Technically it is a public service owned by the British public, and I mean, in my opinion, that is something that's fantastic, so long as there is transparency and the British public have a democratic say on how that's ran. But the private sector companies we're talking about here are companies, the likes of Rupert Murdoch's News UK and global media's LBC and things like that, where, like I said, not only will you get paid a really good salary, but also you won't necessarily have to be as careful with your reporting or as accurate. So Laura Kuenssberg, though, is also a character who has been under a lot of scrutiny for her role in the BBC, because she's she's made questionable decisions in the past that have led people to believe that she's perhaps quite biased. For example, during the 2019 general election, she reported that a Labour activist or a Labour staffer had smacked someone in Matt Hancock's team, that there'd been an assault, a Labour assault on the Tories, physically, someone had been attacked. That later turned out to not be true. She withdrew that, obviously, when that came out, but she did no sort of due diligence. She didn't do her homework there, and as a result, a lot of people saw that. And as we know, fake news spreads twice as fast as real news. She's also been criticized before for other things, like during the general election in 2019. She said, before the exit poll had been released, that there was she'd heard things that the exit poll was not looking very good for Labour. Now, that's technically illegal. You're not supposed to do that if you have information about the exit poll. Reporters aren't supposed to release any information about the exit poll until the clock strikes 10 and no one can vote anymore, because otherwise they're basically saying they're utilising a sort of very accurate prediction of the election results, which may to potentially sway votes before they've been cast when there's still time left to vote. So I don't think the BBC is in very good hands here, and I think it shows us the direction of the BBC would really not benefit from this, and I think it's going in the wrong direction. We know that there's a strong connection between the BBC and the Conservative Party. You know, a lot of the time, people who've donated massive amounts of money to the Tories, or people who've even worked with the Tories or for the Tories, then go into higher positions in the BBC. Laura Kuenssberg has been very amiable, very fraternal with Boris Johnson, you know, very friendly with him. So it does concern me, but you never know. Maybe she'll turn out to be you know, way higher than our estimations are putting her at. But we just have to wait and see. Personally, I think there's plenty of other journalists who could fill that role better. But you never know, she might surprise us. So the next thing that we're talking about is maybe a little bit unusual for this show, because we try and keep things pretty political, right? Because that's the kind of news that really matters. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if Rihanna started talking shit about Taylor Swift at some award show. But this award show incident was pretty major, and if you've read the subtitle, then and even if you haven't, you probably still know anyway. Will Smith slaps Chris Rock in the face at the Oscars, and I believe we have a clip. So let's watch the internationally televised assault.
You know who's got the hardest job tonight? Javier Bardem and his wife are both nominated. Now, if she loses, he can't win. He is praying that Will Smith wins. Like, please, Lord. Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane jump.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay? Okay. That was a greatest night in the history of television. Okay. Okay.
That was absolutely mental. When I saw that, I thought it must be staged. right? When I saw that Will Smith had slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars, I was like, the Oscars, the Academy will do anything to stay relevant. I think, like me, most people didn't even know that the Oscars was happening. Most people didn't really think, you know, don't think about the Oscars at all, because it's become very well, people don't really care about it. I think people care more about some other award shows, but yeah, Jack's saying here, this legit gets worse and more sinister every time I watch it. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. The more you watch it, the more you realize it's very, very unlikely that this was like some kind of weird staged thing that the Oscars were doing to trying to stay relevant, because I don't think Will Smith would agree to that, considering how horrible a light it paints in him. So that was an internationally televised assault, basically. Chris Rock is making a joke. Chris Rock wasn't even the main presenter of the Oscars there. He was just presenting like one award or something. And he's making a joke comparing Jada, who is Jada Smith, who's Will Smith's wife, of being... he's comparing her to G.I. Jane. It was like a movie that came out like the 90s or something. And G.I. Jane is like this character who has a shaved head. And Jada has alopecia, right? Which, if you don't know, is a condition that means that there's frequent hair loss, and sometimes the person can't grow like any hair really consistently anywhere on their body, and it can cause a lot of anxiety. It can cause a lot of body image issues, a lot of insecurity. It's not a pleasant thing, but regardless of if you think the joke is mean-spirited or even a little bit ableist, Jesus Christ, it does not warrant going over and slapping someone. And in the middle of the Oscars as well, how straight... I mean, all this whole time, people could have been assaulting Ricky Gervais, and he's managed to get away with it at the Golden Globes however many times. It's pretty baffling. I think a lot of the celebrities who wanted to sort of assault him at the Golden Globes probably kicking themselves now, and they could have gotten away with it. And obviously after this, Will Smith then goes and wins Best Actor. And, you know, let's not debate the merits of that. I mean, I think Andrew Garfield and Benedict Cumberbatch deserve that more. But anyway, the discourse around this that was on Twitter was particularly interesting, I thought. I think we might have some tweets. Do we have some tweets that we could show? I don't know if we do, but yeah, so some pretty funny shit came out, right? Like, Will Smith was provoked by NATO expansion. You know, there was a lot of interesting stuff, but some people were kind of saying that Chris Rock was in the wrong, and what he was saying was drenched in misogyny and racism and a horrible not just a horrible comment about Jada Smith, but also about black women in general. And I think that's taking it a bit too far. This person on Twitter says, this question is rhetorical. Why is it that white feminists have labelled Will Smith's behaviour toxic masculinity, but not Chris Rock's pattern of belittling Jada Pinkett Smith and black women as a whole? I don't really think that this has anything to do with race or gender. I know I am but a white man, and I know that it's very easy for me to say that, no, this isn't about race, this isn't about gender, because fundamentally I have privilege in both of those areas. I understand that. But it does feel very unlikely to me that comparing a bald person to a bald character in a movie has anything really to do with their gender or their race. I don't know. And it's quite, you know, it's not, I don't think, a very brutal joke. I think, you know, maybe it's a bit mean, but I certainly don't think it's particularly horrendous. There's been many worse things that have happened at the Oscars, though. You know, some people saying that this is like the worst thing on earth. You know, people saying that Will Smith could have like killed Chris Rock with his immense power. You know, I don't know about that. And this certainly isn't the worst moment the Oscars has had. You know, you've had people speaking out against American imperialism and war who've been like booed off stage, and then you've had situations where, like, you know, people have been harassed for speaking out on various political issues that were very, very important. So I don't really know if this would be the worst moment the Oscars has had, but Jack says here, it seems to be entirely a free speech v physical assault issue to me. Where should the line be drawn on free speech to you? Well, for me personally, as long as you're not inciting violence or spreading disinformation on a major scale, you should be able to say whatever you want. So if you're Facebook, or you're a politician, or you're a media organization, and you're deliberately lying to people and misleading people, well, your freedom of speech should be shut down there. If you're inciting violence and saying that, you know, people should be killed or have human rights stripped from them, or they should be hurt, they should be beaten, they should be assaulted, whatever, then absolutely you should not be allowed to say that. But anything else, I think you're kind of getting into slightly dangerous territory. You know, if making a bit of a mean-spirited joke now results in physical assault, you know, where is that line? You know, where people can make jokes. And I think, you know, as much as the whole hullabaloo about comedians being like cancelled and all this, like, they can't say anything anymore and they're meant to challenge people, and then they just rant for 25 minutes about how fucking stupid transgender people are or whatever, and how a woman can't have a penis and all this bollocks, right? As much as that is way over exaggerated, it's also important to remember free speech is really important, and comedians should be allowed to make jokes at the expense of the richest and most influential people in the world. And look, Chris Rock clearly at the end of that clip is he goes like, okay, and you can see he's a quite an intelligent comic, Chris Rock, and I think he probably comes up with about 30 different insults that he could use on the Smith family right there and be absolutely brutal, and he chooses not to, right? Probably because out of fear that there'll be like an outright brawl. And while comedians shouldn't be just really mean and cruel and ableist and racist and etc., they should be allowed to make jokes that certainly aren't that brutal. I mean, come on, it's not that bad a joke, you know. And even if it was, it does not justify assaulting someone. And Will Smith just got away with it, obviously. I mean, he's apologized to Chris Rock now, and said that it was all about, like, you know, love makes you do crazy things. Okay, but you know, the less we talk about the relationship with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, the better, I think, because it's a very odd one. But yes, that was a weird story. I'm not sure I even like talking about that because that's very strange, and not at all the kind of stuff that we usually go for on the show. But I mean, we had to talk about it. Come on, we had to. Okay, the final story we have here before the hot take of the week, which I'm very excited to talk about, is about Rishi Sunak. So Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the richest MP in the House of Commons, he's worth about £200 million, has given bankers a £7.3 billion tax break very recently. So, as you all know, and as the sort of subheading shows, there's a lot of people, well, not sure, says a lot of people in this country are really, really struggling, and bills are increasing, and it's becoming harder and harder for people to be able to afford even the basics that they should be able to afford. So there's a clip here that we have where Rishi Sunak is being interviewed, being grilled by a committee of MPs, and it's Angela Eagle, who's a Labour MP, who's talking to him. And I think the video is a little bit on the longer side, but I think it's important to watch. So let's throw it up and have a watch.
Yeah, I mean, to sum up then, you've made a political choice to plunge 1.3 million people, including 500,000 children, into absolute poverty. On the figures we have now, that is what you've chosen to do in your Spring State.
No, what I've chosen to do is ameliorate, on average, a third of the impact on living standards from forces that are clearly outside of my control, global in nature. We've come up with a package that is progressive in the way it's been designed, and crucially will not add to the inflationary pressures in a significant way, which would harm the very people that we care about and want to make sure that we do care for, and have put in place specific support to help them. Now, I totally accept you might have preferred to say, well, I would rather not cut taxes on 30 million working people.
Don't put words into my mouth.
No, but you said it's choice, right? So there's, and as the chair said, so there's a choice that people can make within a constraint of how much is a responsible amount to borrow.
What I'm trying to do,
I'm comfortable with the choices that I've made are the right ones for the country.
What I'm trying to do is tease out your choices. I don't want you to speculate on what mine might have been. The issue here is that we've got people on fixed rates of income that are going to suffer very, very badly in the next period, whatever happens in October. For example, a single person caring for their parent whose main source of income is their carer's allowance of £67 a week. They're not going to be able to accommodate a huge trebled, quadrupled energy bill, are they? You've not helped them.
Well, we've announced £9 billion worth of support in February to help people with energy bills.
Social security benefits.
Well, could I just answer the question?
By 12 billion in real terms, a minus 5% real terms cut in welfare and social security benefits doesn't seem the best way of approaching this vicious increase in the cost of living for those people on the lowest levels of income.
So, just to step back for a moment, I want to say something. I want to say that I think Rishi Sunak is quite a clever politician, and I think that he knows how he's portraying himself. He's trying to portray himself as this kind of reasonable, but very, fiercely pragmatic, but very competent politician. He's quite, he's sort of quite well cut. He's very sort of clean. He's not the kind of scruffy Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn type sort of aesthetically. I know Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson couldn't be further from each other in every other way, but you know what I mean. But Rishi Sunak is really a fascinating political character. Let's talk about the way he tries to turn that onto a criticism of Labour and of Angela Eagle. He said, maybe you wouldn't want to cut taxes for millions of working families across Britain. He's trying to put words in the mouth, obviously, trying to say, the alternative to what he's talking about is keeping taxes higher for working people so they have even less money in their pockets. Now, it's fundamentally not true that's what Labour wants anyway. But even if it was, that doesn't answer the questions that she's asking him about his own policies. Right, and second, anyway, the Tories have raised national insurance contributions, which has affected working class people more than anyone. So I don't really understand what his argument can be there. But something else that I think probably the most important part of that is when Rishi Sunak says that they've helped with about a third of those increases in costs. The government, they're offering support for people, but they don't want to spend too much because that could risk increasing inflationary pressures. Now, that kind of blows me away a little bit, and I'll tell you why. So, inflation obviously is a phenomenon that is it's a bad thing for the economy to have significant levels of inflation, but it's actually good to have small levels, right? I'm sure everyone watching this knows that already, but it's worth saying. What's also worth saying is that what Rishi Sunak is trying to convey to us here is that there's a choice. You can choose either high inflation whilst making sure everyone has the basic necessities they need to live, or we can have low inflation and a strong economy whilst millions of people languish in poverty and get pushed further and further and further into it. Now, even if that were true, and it's not, what kind of economy is it where if you provide the basic necessities to live to all of your people, that means housing and food and water and energy and these things, then your economy is going to go down the shitter. What kind of economy is that? He's indirectly destroying his own economic dogma and his party's own economic lies that they've been spewing for at least the last 43 years since Margaret Thatcher came to power and ruined everything. So that's I think the most important thing we can take away from what Rishi Sunak is saying there, that he's admitting that the philosophy of the Conservative Party and his personal philosophy is that you can choose between low inflation and helping people have the basics they need to survive. And this is not just like, you know, a few thousand people, which would be bad enough. This is millions of people in the country. And he's saying, you can have one or the other. And ultimately, if you do try and help those people, inflation will get so high that it won't make a difference, and actually their standard of living will still go down anyway. So if you're organizing an economy, right, the basic stuff, the base has got to be, we want to provide healthcare, we want to provide housing, water, electricity, food, jobs. I don't know if I said housing. You know what? Energy and education, right? And obviously you want infrastructure, you want like roads and public transport, and, you know, different buildings for various different specific industries and things like that. That's kind of the base of the economy, right? You provide people with the basic stuff that they need to live and potentially thrive. What is the fucking point of the economy? What is the fucking point of a country if it can't even do that? We're one of the wealthiest nations on earth. Billionaires in our country got exponentially richer during the pandemic while everyone else suffered. And now the Chancellor is saying, unfortunately, we've got to make tough decisions and we can't, you know, help people and as much as you know, ideally we'd want to. Fundamentally, he just doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. The Conservatives don't care about ordinary people. Now, this probably doesn't come as much of a surprise to anyone, considering they get funded by the very billionaires that exploit working class people all around the country and around the world. But there you go. It needs to be said. So please, if you ever hear this argument again, that inflation is caused by investing in like public services and providing people with the basic services they need to survive, like energy and water and electricity and you know, jobs, housing, healthcare, education, etc. Please, 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 just remind this person that at the end of the day, if that's how the economy works, we need a new fucking system. We need a new system, because no one, very, very few people are benefiting from that system, and it's clearly totally backwards. And it's worth mentioning before we move on to the final part of the show, that there have been studies showing that bankers, for every like dollar or pound a banker earns, several more dollars or pounds are destroyed further down the economic chain in the form of stress, depression, anxiety, exploitation, pollution, and various other things. And that's the same for advertising executives as well. And I encourage you all to look up those studies. We'll probably talk about them more in depth in a future episode, actually, and reference the actual studies and get some graphics up and everything. But I'm just mentioning that because the people who are getting that money, that 7.3 billion, aren't even the ones generating the wealth. The ones generating the wealth are the teachers, you know, the ones generating the wealth are the engineers, the cleaners, the firefighters, the nurses, the doctors, the scientists, you know, the people who lay down the roads, the people who build the bridges, the people who build the buildings, the people who run the trains, the people who are providing services and are helping the productive capacity of our country. Those are the people that create the wealth. The banks suck it from them and destroy wealth further down the economic chain. That's all. That's all most of their actions do in the financial sector. So yeah, a broken economic model, and we need to change it. So, hot take of the week. everyone's favourite part of the show. Personally, it's my favourite. And it's on the subject, roughly, of the Will Smith slap. And I think it's his second time on Hot Take of the Week already, storming ahead in the lead. It is, of course, the one, the only, the crafty man himself, Darren Grimes. So we're going to pull up a couple of tweets right now. So this is something Darren said about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. Being offended doesn't give you the right to slap someone. Can't believe that even needs to be said. Absolutely, Darren. Absolutely. You know, Darren and people on GB News and various others in the right-wing sphere of political commentary journalism, I use that word advisedly, in the UK, really, you know, they talk about freedom of speech a lot. They really feel very strongly about it. And that's great, because I feel very strongly about it. Everyone else at DGN feels very strongly about it. So let's look at another tweet he made a little while ago on a similar-ish issue. So GB News reported, breaking, mum banned from driving after admitting using her Range Rover to move insulate Britain protester. Darren Grimes then says, I'm sorry, but this is outrageous. Why should a mother who was trying to get through the green extreme and get her son to school be punished for nudging an illegal roadblock? The law in Britain is now firmly in favour of those breaking the law as long as it's for woke causes. Now, setting aside that that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever read, what Darren is talking about here is when people were protesting the general situation of energy production and energy services in the UK, because it's been, you know, we've been far too reliant on fossil fuels for far too long. You know, if we had properly invested, you know, started investing 10 years ago, large amounts of money in renewable sources, whether it's nuclear or solar or wind or geothermal or hydroelectric, we'd be far less dependent on fossil fuels. And obviously in this situation with Russian gas, we'd be a lot less dependent on that. So the war in Ukraine would be having less of an impact on us. The sanctions that we're putting in place on Russia wouldn't have as much of an impact on us. And they were talking about that, and they were talking about energy prices, and they were talking about privatization and how that means that services are run in the interest of a handful of wealthy shareholders rather than the general public who use the services. There were lots of different debates being had, but their methods weren't great. They were going into the middle of roads and sitting there and protesting and blocking the way of cars, many of which were being driven by ordinary people who have nothing to do with decisions made regarding energy production and energy prices and, you know, renewables and all that stuff in the UK. So they were, I think, targeting the wrong people, and they just pissed off a lot of ordinary people around the country. But there was someone who was in a car and basically ran over someone. He says nudged with their car, right? You know, if someone sat on the road and you drive into them, you're trying to run them over, right? And so the police rightfully said, you know, you can't really do that. That's bad. So that's kind of the event, and obviously we know what happened with the Will Smith story. But what I find fascinating is that Darren Grimes, like many other right-wing political commentators, is showing hypocrisy so blatantly, so obviously. It's like they know that we know how much of a grift this is for them. I mean, Darren was a Lib Dem a few years ago, right? In fairness, your political views can change drastically in like a year, let alone, you know, like 6 years or however long ago it was when he was a Lib Dem. So that's fair enough. But slapping someone because you're offended is absolutely unacceptable. But running over someone because they're sat in the road is fine. Now, that would maybe be the case if someone magically appeared in the middle of the road and then you were driving at 70 miles per hour and you accidentally hit them when you pressed on the brakes. But this woman was driving in her car. They were right in front of her. She'd gotten fed up, so she started to run them over. So running over a person is fine. Deliberately running someone over in a car, that's all right. Slapping someone though, that's not okay. That's not okay. Freedom of speech. But the whole idea of freedom of speech is that people can protest. They can cause obstructions to everyday life. That's kind of the point of protest. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very useful, or it wouldn't be very successful ever, right? If protests were just completely aesthetic and superfluous, and they didn't affect the ongoing, the goings on of everyday life, right? They wouldn't be any good then, would they? The key is to try and target, you know, the people who you're protesting against, you know, protest against the fossil fuel executives, protest against the government. Don't, you know, piss off ordinary people. But that absolutely is within their right to freedom of speech. And he's saying woke causes. Like, what does woke even mean in this context, Darren? Look, I'm talking to you directly now, Darren. I'm talking to you directly. And I know you're watching. I know you're a huge fan. And as a fellow political commentator from the northeast of England, I know you have a few more followers than me. But, you know, we have a little bit of a connection there. Just level with me on this. It's a grift, innit? You don't have to tell anyone else. Just tell me. Just DM me and just like, and I promise I won't tell anyone. I won't show anyone. But it is a grift, isn't it? You constantly show hypocrisy. Woke? What the fuck does that even mean in this context? Caring about energy prices and energy dependence on Russian fossil fuels in the wake of a climate disaster. What the hell does that have to do with being woke? Woke is to do with social injustice, right? And you seem to think that now anything that is remotely oriented towards the left, or anything that is remotely oriented towards helping working class people, or make the country safer, or make the country more independent in terms of its energy reliance, its energy production, anything to try and solve issues to do with climate change and biodiversity collapse, it's all woke nonsense. Apparently, you can get away with breaking the law as long as it's for a woke cause. Darren, what has happened to you? You've melted your own brain because of the grift, and I'd like you to just admit that's what it is, man. I'd like you to just admit that's what it is. Do you really think the biggest issues in society, and I know this is a little bit of a tangent from what we were just talking about, but do you really think the biggest issues in society are people being woke? You really think cancel culture is more important of an issue to talk about than like climate change? You don't really seem asked about that. You don't really seem asked about the gradual privatisation of the NHS. You don't really seem asked about the rising cost of living. And if you do, you always find a way to blame it on progressivism. You always find a way to blame it on fighting climate change, or blame it on people being woke or whatever. You don't really seem that asked about the horrendous state of public transport in this country. You don't really seem that asked with putting more police officers on the streets to make the country safer. You don't really seem that asked about investing more in the fire service because of how much deaths from fire increased since the massive cuts to fire service budgets. You don't really seem that asked about the fact that in real terms, NHS workers like nurses have had their wages decline. You don't really seem that asked that we just had the worst decade of wage growth since the fucking Napoleonic War. But apparently, when a woman wants to use a bathroom, but because she's transgender, she still has a penis, that the fucking sky is going to fall in. Come on. Just level with me. It's a grift. It's a grift. Get back to me on that one. Thank you all very much for watching, especially you, Darren. But this has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you all. These have been some weird stories today. Some of them really depressing. Some of them just downright odd. Make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Share. Little voice break there. I'm almost 20, but my voice still breaks frequently. Isn't that fantastic? So yeah, it's the beauty of a live show. Can't cut it out. So yeah, it really helps the show. And if you want to like share it with your friends, your family, your dog, your grandma, whatever it is, that would be absolutely fantastic. We really appreciate it. It helps the show. And remember to check out Create for Ukraine. Those guys are doing some absolutely brilliant work, really fabulous stuff. And if you see anything that is as or more inane and hypocritical and stupid as what we've had on Hot Take of the Week this week, feel free to send it in. Send it to my Twitter at @RileyTalk_Bombito. Yes, it's a weird Twitter handle. I made it when I was like 12. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.